excited to share this content with you folks. It's been through years of research, but we are going to look at the architecture of the gate and the measurements to see, does this show us time? Does this show us a day, a week, a month, years? Does it show us the calendar? Does it show us the millennium itself? This is something called sacred architecture, and we're going to take a look at it in this video. Gates at the center of time. Oh, this is exciting. So you can see we have set up our gate once again, and we're going to talk about how the gate functions in its architecture as a timepiece, how it shows us time, how it, throughout the measurements and structure of the building, is something called sacred architecture. Sacred architecture means that the person building the structure has placed within it information to convey a message, okay, to tell a story. That's why he tells Ezekiel to go through the details, the minute details of everything that's going on in the temple complex, but in particular the gates. So we began to realize a few years ago, when looking at the gates, that the gates are clearly showing us elements of time and the calendar. Now we knew this through a number of ways, that the whole temple complex is showing us the biblical calendar, which has 30 days in a month. In the previous video, we had showed you how the 30 chambers represent the 30 days in the month, and how there are 4 buildings in the 4 corners, which we call the tefuka, which are the solar days. Okay, and then the gates, we are showing you how the gates function as a sundial, so that when the sun's alignment comes into certain positions through the year, the equinoxes and the solstice, it aligns perfectly with the temple. So we looked at that as an idea, as a concept, based on the numbers of the architecture of the gates. And that's what we're going to discuss in this video. Now, in simple terms, some of this is a little bit advanced in terms of the numbers and whatnot. It's not advanced, it's very simple math, but basically the function of the gates is to have a door. And it states clearly, as we mentioned in the last video, that the gate in the inner court of the east gate, the inner court of the east gate, remember the east gate of the outer court is closed. It is closed. But what it tells us is the gate on the inner court of the east gate, it says that its function in opening and closing happens on 2 different cycles. Those are cycles of time, okay? And one of them is every week, okay? Now, the purpose of these cycles is because there are shifts, okay? There are cycles of time of service that's taking place in the inner court. Those happen on weekly cycles. It's called a priest course. Those of you who follow the Enoch calendar, you know what I'm talking about. So what that means is the gate is open and closed, okay, on the Sabbath. All right, that's what we're going to look at. Very important, very, very significant. And so what is happening is when it's open and closed, it's like workers on a shift. They go in and they serve for a certain time period of their shift. They leave, another shift comes. So that's what the weekly cycle does. And we're going to suggest the monthly cycle is the same. So for example, the gate is closed, it says clearly, 6 working days in Ezekiel chapter 46. So you can see we have our gate closed, and we're going to do our best to close our gate during the 6 working days and only open it as a reminder to us on the significant days. So we're trying to do this video before the other time the east gate is opened. When is that? That is the monthly. So let's open our gate. It's not quite there, but you can see this does actually work and function. Okay, so now the doors are open, okay, to the gate on the Kodesh, which is the month, the first day of the first month. Now, that is significant because that's going to, in the calendar, mark the spring equinox. Quite often, that spring equinox is going to come very, very close to that day when the East Gate is open on the Kodesh. Okay, there's a cycle. We'll show you how the leap cycle is coded into the gates. So, by the time you see this, okay, the next day afterwards, if you watch it when the video is released, the next day is the first day of the 8th month. So the East Gate is opened. Okay, and again, meaning that a monthly shift of priesthood begins. Okay, and that continues for a month, and then another shift of priesthood comes the following month. So you blow the trumpet on the Kodesh, the month, okay, and there are significant points where, all right, the Esther came before the king, for example. She said, I have not come before the king these 30 days. So she was only coming before the king once a month, every 30 days. All right, and we also see that in the cycle of the military. That's why we are convinced that Esther is the 144,000, and that the 144,000 are in 1 Chronicles 27, when there was a shift of monthly of troops, okay? And those troops came every month. So again, the same cycle of when the gate is open on the monthly, okay? So coming this week, we have the 6th day of the week, which is the preparation day for the Sabbath. Then the East Gate is open, all right? Then the next day is Shabbat, the 7th day of the week, and the East Gate is open. So you can clearly see in Ezekiel 46, it is giving us time, and we're suggesting those are shifts, okay? Now, that is, very simple to understand, of course. But then what we must do is we must take the time to look at the architecture and look at the structure of the building, because there's more than going on than the gate just opening and closing at certain times, giving us time. The actual measurements of what is going on in that building gives us more time than any other structure in the temple complex. For example, we showed you in the previous video all the measurements. Well, of those measurements, many of them equate to time. So you can see that the doors are open on the Shabbat. Shabbat is a weekly cycle. Now, every 3 months, okay, every 3 months, there are 13 Shabbats. Shabbatim. I'm trying to say it in Hebrew, but basically what we're saying is Sabbath, there's 13 of those in every 3-month cycle. Well, when you enter the gate, the doorway entry is 10 cubits, and then the entry goes wider, 13 cubits. So that's what those 13 cubits mean. We'll show you exactly where this is, okay? Now, the other measurement is you have the doors, and outside the door was a porch. And if we measure the face of the porch to the back of the gate, picture this here is the back of the gate on the other side of the doors, okay? Well, that distance from here to the porch is 50 cubits. Now, 50 cubits, that's important to us because if we multiply that by 25.2 inches, which is the number of inches in a cubit, it comes to 1,260 inches. Yes, 1,260, just like in Revelation 12, the 1,260 days. That is precisely the measurement of the porch to the back wall, okay, of the gate. So that is clearly giving us 30 days in a month, all right, in this biblical order of the calendar, all right. The other thing about the area of the porch, imagine that this here is the porch. It is 10 cubits by 10 cubits. It's a perfect square. And it has a post, picture this as the post of a palm tree either side. Now, the 10 cubits. Now, if we look at that in feet, a cubit is 2.1 feet, okay? So if we multiply 2.1 times 10, right, that's 21 feet. So technically, yes, the distance of the porch is 21 feet. I'm not saying it's this small, but we're just illustrating. 21 feet. Now it's a perfect square, so it's going to be 21 feet by 21 feet by 21 feet by 21 feet, which is a total of 84 feet. All right, what's the significance of 84? 84 divided by 12 is 7. Okay, so what is 7? 84 months, okay, is 7 years. So yes, the Shemitah cycle of when you rest is coded into the porch. The porch is 21 by 21 by 21 by 21 feet. Multiplied by 4 for each wall is 84 feet. Divided by 12 is 7. Not only that, the steps. Okay, here, I'm going to show you these over here. So over here we got steps, and you can see there's 7 steps. All right, the 7 steps would lead into the porch. All right. The 7 steps leading into the porch would, those are representing the 7 steps going in are also representing the Sabbath, the 7-day, 7 days, and then you rest. So you get 7 steps leading into the doors, and the doors are open, every 7 days. Okay, clearly what's happening is the numbers that are in the structure of the gate are giving us time. All right, it's giving us the Jubilee cycle. Remember how we showed you before? It was 50 cubits from the outside of the porch to the back wall of the other side of the gate, 50 cubits. Well, 50 is also the number of the Jubilee. So you count every 7 years. Okay, that's a Shemitah cycle where you let the land rest. That's coded in the porch. And the distance from that porch to the back wall is 50 cubits, which is the Jubilee. Now, I'm sure all this is just coincidence that these numbers align perfectly with biblical numbers related to time. Obviously, once we began looking at this, it became very apparent that what is happening within the architecture of the gate is clearly the biblical calendar. Now, as amazing as all that is, it actually gets better. So let's do a quick review of what we just discussed. So here is our gate. We're looking bird's eye view. We're looking straight down. Our porch is here. And as we mentioned, it is 10 by 10 cubits, thus representing the Shemitah 7-year cycle, because it represents 84 feet, which are the number of months in a 7-year cycle. In this area here is where the steps would be, and there are 7 steps that you enter. Once you enter, this is called the threshold, and here you can see it says 13. Let's zoom in here. I'll get a zoom in on this so you can see it clearly. All right, so remember what our 13 is. That's the 13 is the number of months in a 3-month time period. You would have 13 Sabbaths. All right, so that's 13. Then once we enter and come in, you begin to observe something else that's really important in prophecy, and that is that there is a repeat of a pattern. Now, our pattern here is, as you can see, is there's a chamber here, and this is 6 cubits. Then you have a post here, which is 5 cubits. So you get a chamber, 6 cubits, a post, 5 cubits, 6 cubits, 5 cubits, 6 cubits, etc. Now, what is the significance of the numbers 6 and 5? Well, it just so happens the same number of steps, remember it took 7 steps to enter, which is, of course, a week of 7 days. Well, in the biblical calendar, what you have to do is add a week every 5 and 6 years, or every 6 and 5 years. It's an alternate cycle. So what this is actually showing us is that within, encoded in the architecture of the building, is this 6, 6 years, 5 years, and at each point you add a week. You add 7 days between these intervals. Now, that might be a stretch to some, which is okay, because again, just within this gate complex, this should be reinforced in other ways, which of course it is through the windows. Now, if we are inside and we are facing one of the walls and we're observing the posts, you can see that there are 6 windows. Okay, windows on 2 floors, if you will. There's not. It's all open, but it's the height of a 2-story building. All right, so you get 6 windows. All right, on the side. Then on the front of the gate, you have 5, because the porch is occupying the space that on the side would be for a window, but here you have 5 windows. All right, so we get again the same cycle of 6 and 5 being repeated. It's in the windows, so if you look from the front, it's 5. If you look on the side, it's 6. If you look on the opposite side, it's 5. If you look on this side, it's 6. Just like we saw here, where it was 6 cubits in the chamber, 5 cubits in the post, 6 cubits in the chamber, 5 cubits in the post. And again, what is the 6 and 5? Every 6 years, every 5 years, you add a week in the calendar. Okay, there we can see something clearly defined in the architecture of the gate. Now, we showed you before how the gate opens and closes at critical times. Now, this is another area that people struggle and debate over the calendar, over the leap cycle. They struggle and debate actually even over simple things like, when does a day start? Well, just like the gate shows us the leap cycle, just like the gate shows us the Jubilee, just as the gate shows us every single aspect of Shabbat and the different times to rest, even the feast, okay, with the sundial, it also shows us when a day begins, okay? Of course, the day is another thing. When does the day begin? And people will basically have 2 views. It begins at sundown or it begins at sunrise. But once again, the gate itself will show the proof of when the actual time is. So as we showed you before, in Ezekiel 46 was showing us when to open and close the gate. Okay, the gate of the inner court shall be locked towards the east and shall be shut 6 working days, but it shall be open on the day of the Kodesh, first of the month. It shall be opened. All right. The prince shall enter by the way of the porch of the gate without, and shall stand by the post of the gate. And the priest shall prepare burnt offerings, his peace offerings, and he shall worship at the threshold of the gate. Then he shall go forth. Then it says, the gate shall not be shut until evening. Okay, why is the gate shut not until evening? Well, that is the completion, okay, of one day. Okay, then it's open, okay, at sundown. All right, that's the next day. So the transition of one day and into the next is sundown. Okay, that's clearly what it says, at evening. Now again, this is the instructions Ezekiel's giving about the gate, okay, in the first of the month. Now, if that wasn't good enough for you, of course, Nehemiah confirms this view of the gate and the time of the day when a day begins and ends. Basically, Nehemiah is restoring not only the gates, but he is restoring the worship and the Sabbath. Okay, and he reprimands the people. In those days, I saw people treading the winepress, bearing burdens on the Sabbath day, men of Tyre coming, buying and selling on the Sabbath day. All right, and he begins to rebuke them. In verse 19 of Nehemiah 13, and it came to pass when the gates of Jerusalem began to be dark before the Sabbath. Okay, same thing. The gates of Jerusalem. Now, what he's talking about is the gates outside the city. We're talking about the gates in the temple complex, but he's applying the same principle that we learned. When is a day? When it began to be dark, or sundown. All right, before then I commanded the gate should not be shut, and charged that they should not be opened till after the Sabbath. Some of my servants said at the gate they should bear no burden and brought him beyond the Sabbath day. Okay, so clearly within the gates is the information on when a day is. When does a day start? When does a day end? It's sundown. Okay, that's clearly what it says in Ezekiel. And that's clearly what it says in Nehemiah 12 when he restores the gates. He restores the gates of Jerusalem, and he restores the worship by the keeping of the Sabbath. Now, another thing we want to mention here in the principle of the Sabbath and the principle of the worship is something we have mentioned. Let's go to Jeremiah. I'm going to go to Jeremiah chapter 17. And Jeremiah talks about the relationship between, the worship and keeping the gates, and what we had talked about in the previous video of those sitting on thrones. All right, Jeremiah 17:19. And go stand in the gate of the children of people, where the kings of Judah come in by way they go out of the gates of Jerusalem, gates outside the city. And say to them, hear the word of the Lord, kings of Judah and all the inhabitants of Jerusalem that enter in by these gates. Thus says the Lord God, take heed to yourselves that you bear no burden on the Sabbath day, nor bring in the gates of Jerusalem. Neither carry forth a burden out of your houses on the Sabbath day. Neither do any work, but hallow or make holy the Sabbath day, as I commanded your fathers. But they obeyed not, neither inclined their ear, but made their neck stiff, that they might not hear and receive instruction. And it came to pass that if you diligently hearken, says the Lord, I will bring no burden through the gates of the city on the Sabbath day, but hallow the Sabbath day to do no work therein. Then shall there enter into the gates of the city kings, princes, sitting upon the throne of David. All right, where are they sitting upon the throne of David? In the gates of the city. All right, men of Judah and the inhabitants of Jerusalem, and this city shall remain forever. And it shall come to pass from the cities of Judah and the place of Jerusalem, from the land of Benjamin, from the plain and the mountains in the south, bringing forth burnt offerings, sacrifices, meat offerings, incense, bringing sacrifice to the praise unto the house of the Lord. But if you will not hearken to me and hallow my Sabbath, nor bear a burden, even the entering in the gates of Jerusalem on the Sabbath day, then I will kindle a fire in the gates thereof, and it shall devour the palaces of Jerusalem, and it shall not be quenched. Okay, so there you can see the connection of the gates with the Sabbath and the thrones. So we had showed you the thrones of the apostles being in the gates. Now there's something else very interesting when we look at the gate and its dimensions as it relates to time. The width, when we're facing the gate from one end to another, this is 37 cubits. Okay, if you remember inside, it talked about there being a length of 25 cubits inside, and then there's the thickness of the wall of 6 cubits, adding 12 to the 25, giving us 37 cubits. Okay, what does this mean? Well, it brings up something fascinating, which we have taught in previous videos, and that is basically the principle of the eras of time related to the number 37. So, allow us to demonstrate here. In this diagram, what you see is, as we've shown you many times, there is a pattern of 4. And now what I want you to think of is that pattern of 4, looking at time and counting it in millennia, so that the first era of time is represented by the first millennium, okay, here. And then the second millennium here, third millennium, fourth millennium. So you can see 1, 2, 3, 4, and then it continues and goes around again. Now, when we do that, you can see when we count, we have a number 3, 6, 9, 12, and then it goes around a second time. So then the numbers are 15, 18, 18 is here, and then 21 and 24. Now, if we look at those and we put them into a calculator, we find something very interesting. And that is this multiplying effect of multiplying these numbers. Now, let's just, for time's sake, do them real quick. 37, and then we had 3 equals 111. So 111 means the first millennium. Then 6 times 37, 222. So you see the pattern. Now, the reason we're bringing this up is that the gates, they're 37 cubits wide, and there is 2.1 cubits in a 2.1 feet in a cubit. So what that means is if we take the 37 and we multiply it by 2.1, we get 777. Now what 777 means is the millennium, 777. So as we go around and we count each 1,000 years, it's going to be 111, 222, 333, 444, 555, 666, 777. 777 is the millennium. So basically, this chart of time is charting time for 8,000 years. After that, 24 times 37, you can see it here, times 24 is 888. 888 is New Jerusalem. So yes, the width of the gate, when we're looking at the gate, is this special number 37, and how it factors into eras of time. So being that it's 37, the number of feet per cubit is 2.1. That gives us the 777 of the millennium. All right. So from studying the architecture of the gate, you can see there's many remarkable things. I wanted to put in that other aspect about the millennial gate and the number 777, of course. But in simple terms, what have we learned? Without much confusion, making it very, very simple to understand, simple terms in time. When is a day? When does a day begin? When does it end? The gate tells us. When is the Sabbath? It's 7 days, keeping the Sabbath. It tells us the month. The gate is open on the Shabbat. The gate is open on the month. Okay, so it tells us a day. It tells us a week. Okay, it tells us the month. Okay, it tells us the years. So we saw coded into the years the distance, 1,260 days, 3.5 years, but giving us 360 days in a year. We also could see the Jubilee, the distance in the gate, from one end of the porch to the face of the gate and on the other. 50 cubits, 50 in the Jubilee. We saw the complex aspect of the leap cycle. In the calendar, we must adjust for a leap cycle, and we could clearly see that it's every 6 years and every 5 years, 6 years, 5 years, 6 years, 5 years. The distance between the chamber and the post and the windows outside the gate, 5 and then 6, 5 and then 6, 6 and then 5, etc. So we do not have to be confused about the calendar. We do not have to be confused about when a day begins and ends. We don't have to be confused about the Sabbath. We don't have to be confused about the calendar. We don't have to be confused about the feasts. Okay? All of that information is in the gates, the gate itself, the architecture. That's why it's so important that we measure the temple, the altar, and those that worship therein. Because within the architecture of the structure, it explains to us time. Okay? So, doing the calendar since 2014, and dealing with people and dealing with the myriads of opinions on when a day is, when the Shabbat is, nothing is more confused than the people doing calendars. It's very unfortunate. But you can see, once we reach the millennium, okay, there's no more confusion. The building itself is going to show you exactly what the calendar is, okay? It's in the architecture. You don't need a piece of paper. Now, this is very, very exciting, of course. We could show you that the gates are a sundial, okay, showing the cycle, which shows us when to keep the feasts. We can see the gates information showing us time. And this is just the beginning of the series, guys. This is very, very exciting series. So stay with us, and we are going to get into more aspects of the temple complex. Remember, at this point, we've really only started with the foundations, showing you the 3D model, and the measurements, and now we're beginning to focus on the buildings. If we have interior of the building, we'll share that with you, of course. But we're just at the gates. Now, in this video as well, there's a lot that we went over, and there's a lot that we went over fairly quickly, which I understand. So I'm going to do the same thing as the last video. I'm going to make a blog post that will accompany this video, because I think it's really important you get these things solid. This is really amazing. If you want to share with people on the calendar, it's the most proof. We can prove any other thing, but the temple itself is a remarkable story. And that's what the Most High has done. He has placed the information in the architecture. That's why it's called sacred architecture. It's holy. All the measurements we want to do exact and do precise, because there's something to them. So that's why it's important that we measure the temple, okay? So guys, that concludes this video. As we said, there will be a blog post. If you go leelandjones.com and you go to the blog, you'll see that we had a blog post on the straight gate that accompanied the last video. And then this one will have a blog post as well, Gates of Time, which will show you more of the verses and things that we went over fairly quickly in this video. So a voice came from the throne saying, "Praise our God, all you his servants that fear his name, both small and great." Enter his gates with thanksgiving